Your timeline has most likely been flooded with news about this European Super Soccer League, the Super League, that is now in the midst of being formed. It's caused major controversy all across the international soccer world. Moose and I, not shockingly, not experts in this area.
No.
So we've decided to bring on an expert, and that is Grant Wahl. He hosts the Football with Grant Wahl podcast. He is one of the preeminent soccer writers in this country, and it is our pleasure, Grant, to be able to tap into your way more brilliant mind than ours on what the hell is going on in Europe right now. So I guess my clunky, U.S. analogy here is actually college football, that this would be like the Alabamas, Ohio States, and LSU's all getting together and saying, the hell with you, NCAA, we're creating our own thing. Am I anywhere close to the mark on that?
I think you probably are. Some of the best comparisons I've heard in the U.S. are to college football, which actually has some similarities with the European soccer structure. And that's not anything new, actually. So what you've got here is the best club tournament in the world in soccer is the UEFA Champions League. It's got the best teams from Europe every year, but it's always been structured in a way that every team that competes in Champions League has to earn their way in every year by finishing in the top 3 or 4 of their domestic European league. So there's no free passes. You have to earn it. And this Super League is saying the 12 biggest soccer clubs in Europe, including 6 in England, are saying, we are going to have our own league above and separate from the UEFA Champions League. And the 12 of us are never going to have to earn our way in. We're just always going to be in it, and we're going to take all the revenues from it because we're the clubs that people actually want to watch in great numbers around the world. And they're ignoring the fact that you need the rest of the soccer clubs and teams, including the upstarts like Leicester City and teams outside of this group, to do what you do. And this Super League, all these teams would compete in it and not do Champions League, which would instantly lose its cachet. But it would also have a hugely negative impact on the domestic leagues, like the English Premier League. There's always so much coverage of the fight to finish in the top 4, because those are the teams that qualify for Champions League the year after. If you take that fight out, then that league loses a lot of its interest. And then I could see them actually feeling like they have to institute American-style end-of-season playoffs, like in the NBA and NFL and every other league just about. And if you think people in Europe are upset right now about this Super League, and they really are upset this week, they'll be even more upset when they realize that's probably the end result.
Well, Grant, strong comments from Gary, a former star for Manchester United. Is having an independent regulator, is that something that's even doable?
Potentially. There's so much that still needs to be determined here, including threats in response to this Super League. Like we're seeing UEFA, which organizes the Champions League, threatening to any player that competes in the Super League, you will not be allowed to play in the World Cup if you do this. So technically that would apply to Christian Pulisic of the United States and Weston McKennie of Juventus, who are the great hopes for the U.S. men's national team in the World Cup. And here's a threat from the head of UEFA. Nope, if you play in this, you're not going to be able to play in the World Cup. So this has a huge impact for how the sport is divided between club and country. And it's really threatening to blow it all up. I think it's important about Gary Neville's clip there, which is great, by the way, that in the U.S., we need to sort of understand that sports in Europe, particularly soccer, there's a 100-year history of how the sport has worked, where there's a pyramid of leagues where you have to earn your way on the field into a league. And so there's promotion and relegation between domestic leagues. So the bottom 3 in the Premier League will go down at the end of this season to the next league. The top 3 in the second tier will come up to the Premier League. And there's this idea that you have to qualify and earn your way into Champions League. So it's very different from the NFL, NBA, MLB. There's no promotion and relegation. All of the teams that are in those leagues, and this has been this way for a century over here, there's no way they're going to go out of the league. But here we are, these Americans, and this is a very American-influenced idea, this Super League, because it's being pushed by American owners of Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal, AC Milan. It's being funded by an American bank, JP Morgan, and it's basically American sports business principles in play here. And so there's a real and probably reasonable anti-American sentiment coming from Europe and around the world about this Super League as well.
Yeah, which was going to lead to the next point is, what's the next step in this process? Obviously, you have, everyone's irate over in Europe about the potential of this happening, Grant. Do you think this gets realized? What's the next step in this story?
I mean, part of me still thinks that this is all an elaborate negotiating tactic by the biggest clubs in European soccer to get UEFA to make concessions to the biggest clubs for the Champions League moving forward. That could be amount of revenue that they get. It could be how many teams, how many big clubs get into Champions League every year. Something like that. That's what we've seen over the last 20 years whenever the big clubs threaten to do this Super League stuff, is they get concessions, they back down, they agree to continue with the Champions League format. This situation has gone much, much farther than any previous one. So that's why people are fearing that this isn't just a negotiating tactic, but it might be, because when you have UEFA responding like the players aren't going to be able to play in the World Cup, well, players might take that into account. And we haven't really heard from the players' side yet. What does Lionel Messi think? What does Cristiano Ronaldo think about all this? And the Super League, by the way, would be a salary-capped league, they've said. And so there aren't usually salary caps in Europe, so the players may not like this. The super agents may not like this, and the unions of the players are not very strong in European soccer compared to the strength of the players' unions in American professional sports leagues. So we might see some sort of player organizing. But clearly the Super League idea is not popular with the fans. I did a poll on my Twitter with over 20,000 votes, and I've even got a lot of American followers, and it's 88% are against the Super League. So
yeah, that's a landslide.
This isn't something that fans, players, managers want.
Yeah, well, I was reading that the JP Morgan was going to guarantee like $400 million per club right out of the gate if they decide to leave and go with the Super League. I mean, that's a lot. Grant Wahl is our guest. Listen to his Football with Grant Wahl podcast. And obviously, he's one of the preeminent soccer writers in this country. We're appreciative of his time. Overall, the American owners you're talking about who now own these clubs, like Stan Kroenke and the Glazer family, who own the Buccaneers, obviously the Kroenkes own the Denver Broncos and the Nuggets, have they overall been good for European soccer? Have they been liked? Have they been accepted? What's our standing as Americans over with European soccer club ownership?
It's a bit of a mixed bag. So Manchester United fans did not like the way the Glazers took over Manchester United because the Glazers saddled the club with additional new debt in the hundreds of millions of dollars while still taking profits themselves. And so that was not received well by Manchester United fans. By the way, Manchester United has not won the Premier League in, I think, 8 or 9 years ever since Sir Alex Ferguson left, so they haven't been winning trophies. On the other end of things, at Liverpool, John W. Henry and Fenway Sports Group came in, and they have been received pretty well over the last several years. And a lot of this is due to winning, right? Liverpool won Champions League a couple of years ago. They won the Premier League last year for the first time ever, first English title in over 2 decades. And so, and there's a feeling like Henry didn't saddle the club with debt. Arsenal fans are not happy with Stan Kroenke. a lot of this is just due to
Although,
how
sorry,
their
he
teams
owns
are
the
doing.
Rams, not the Broncos. Let me correct myself there. He owns the Rams, Stan Kroenke, and the Denver Nuggets.
Yeah.
Continue.
And it's not like Stan Kroenke or the Glazers have shown themselves willing to study the history of European soccer or to show that they've learned anything about the history of their own club. And they kind of don't do anything publicly. And so the response has been pretty negative. The owners of AC Milan actually are American, and they sort of turned things around over the last year after a bad decade for AC Milan. So it's a mixed bag, but I think people have accepted that Americans are buying big soccer teams in Europe. That's been the case for a while.
Grant, last one for me would be this. If this does happen, right, if it's not just a negotiating tactic, if this does move forward and this new Super League is created, what do you think the impact is long term?
As much as I'm against the idea of it, I think it would make money. I don't envision a situation in which the fans vow to stop watching and just don't do it in great numbers. And I think the owners of these clubs breaking away realize that. That's not to say it's not a cynical exercise, and it's really going to hurt the clubs, all the rest of the teams that aren't involved in the Super League. And what we're seeing here is essentially what we're seeing in society all over the world, which is the rich want to get even richer, the poor are getting poorer, and the inequality is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's what the Super League would create.
Grant, last one. We only have a minute left. The U.S. men's national team failed to qualify for the Tokyo Olympics. So this is the third straight Olympic Games that they will not be participating in. How should we feel about that as Americans?
It's another missed opportunity for U.S. men's soccer. Third straight time, you're right about that, failing to qualify for the Olympics. The Olympic men's soccer tournament is different from the Olympic women's tournament because all the best players play in the women's tournament, whereas the men's tournament is an under-23 tournament. But the U.S. has a great group of under-23 players on the men's side right now, and I think they could have due to bizarre rules, their best players weren't allowed to compete in the qualifying tournament. They might have been going to the Olympics, in which case the U.S. would have been a medal favorite. U.S. men's soccer just needs some good publicity. And I think this would be a nice thing to have happen. Now, we are seeing this group of under 23 young men's players from the U.S. playing at the biggest European clubs, which is an advance. And so they should qualify for the World Cup. And the biggest games this year are going to be the World Cup qualifiers, the 14 games that take place starting in September. And obviously, you got to qualify for the World Cup first. The U.S. didn't last time for the Senior World Cup. But if this team gets there, I think they could actually go potentially farther in the tournament than previous U.S. teams. But they got to get there first.
Wow, that's great. Grant Wahl, of course, listen to his Football with Grant Wahl podcast. It is amazing. And also, please send our undying gratitude and thank you to your wife, Dr. Celine Gounder, who joined us when the pandemic first hit. She's now on President Biden's advisory board. She's an infectious disease specialist at NYU and has been on the front lines of fighting this pandemic. So, Grant, please send our best to your wife. And thank you so much for explaining this to us because we clearly didn't know anything.
Great talking to you guys. Thanks for having me.
Grant. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Great to see you. Great to talk with you.